What's going on, dudes and dudettes? It's your boy Innocence, back at it again with another video. And today, I have somewhat of an interesting one for you, regarding a question that I've seen popping up more and more as we get closer to the next gen console release. That being, should I get a PS5 digital edition or an Xbox Series S? And my first response to this question is, are people actually asking this? Like, is this actually a thing? Because don't get me wrong, both consoles are great and all, but typically when stuck on a decision or when you're having trouble deciding between two objects, those objects are generally similar enough to be compared, with slight differences that make putting thought into said decision worthwhile. Think like deciding between buying a $20,000 SUV and a similarly priced sedan. They're close enough that they're able to be compared, but different enough that it makes sense that you want to think about it before making that decision. But in the case of the Xbox Series S and the PS5 digital edition, that would be more like comparing a luxury SUV to an expensive high-end sports car. Two completely different markets. I mean, sure, they're both cars, but there's clearly a separate market for them, and generally speaking, buyers of one wouldn't ever consider purchasing the other, which is unlike our original example, where it is completely plausible that someone might get stuck between a normal SUV and a normal sedan. But again, no one's walking into a dealership on the fence as to whether or not they're going to be picking up a Corvette or a Mercedes GLC class. Like, that just doesn't happen. And whether or not you agree with that weird analogy, the whole point of me giving it is because I genuinely believe that these consoles aren't intended to attack the same market of people. So why are they being compared? Well, it probably has a lot to do with the fact that both the Series S and PS5 are quote-unquote the little brothers of their more expensive counterparts, so they probably got lumped into the same category because of that. Again, even though I honestly believe that Sony never intended for the PS5 DE to compete with the Series S. But since we're here and everyone seems to be wondering, I guess we might as well try to take a crack at it and ask ourselves once again. If we had to hypothetically pretend that someone does have either $300 or $400 to spend and can't make up their mind, which one should they pick up? Well, let me just start out by saying that before the official price of the PS5 was revealed, I was in the hashtag 449/349 price guess group for the PS5 and PS5 DE respectively. And the reason I suspected Sony might go with that price point is because they might have wanted to offer a more competitive price on the lower end to combat the Series S, even though they didn't really want to, as well as hit the Series X with a sneaky undercut of $50 to snag any consumers who that might have made a big difference to. And I fully believe that had they went with that pricing scheme, this video wouldn't even have to be made because the answer would have been so clear cut. A $349 PS5 versus a $299 Series S, well, that's an absolute no-brainer. For less than the price of the clothes on your back, you can upgrade to a 4K 120 FPS experience and an insane lineup of exclusives. Yes, please. But the fact that Sony went with a $399 pricing scheme is why I feel like people are even asking this question, because a $100 investment is much bigger than a $50 one. Well, duh. Mathematics. So now that we've set the stage, let's finally delve into the main course. First things first, let's see what the Series S is offering. Microsoft is claiming that the Series S is the exact same thing as the Series X, with just a cut down GPU that will be targeting 1440p 60 FPS instead of the Series X's 4K, which is a pretty interesting tactic to release a less powerful console alongside your main option, or if we look at it from the perspective of a glass half full, to release a mid-generational upgrade that is the Series X at launch. So our first objective should obviously be to find out how powerful this thing is, which is honestly going to be much simpler than you might be led to believe. And that's because in their Inside the Xbox Series S video, Microsoft themselves actually confirmed that the Series S is about 4 times more powerful than the original Xbox One, graphically speaking. And that statement should definitely ring a bell, because that's the exact same metric that was used back in 2017 to advertise the Xbox One X when compared to the original Xbox One. So that means that Microsoft has either accidentally or purposefully confirmed that both the Series S and the Xbox One X are roughly on par when it comes to GPU performance, which, fun fact, completely destroys all the fanboys that have been raving for months that teraflops matter, because they obviously don't, but I digress. And I don't want to get into the minutia of which of the two is more powerful because I honestly don't know or care, and there seems to be an ever-growing heated debate between late Xbox One X buyers and early Series S adopters as to which will come out on top. And I don't really want to step on anyone's FPS ego in this video, video. It's a pretty heated debate that us PC players have been having for decades now, you know, like who has higher FPS, so it's pretty funny and kind of weird to finally see console players starting to go at it too. Regardless, the only reason the comparison matters to us is because we know that the graphics cards have roughly the same amount of power, and we can already see how the Xbox One X performs in gaming. And if I had to guess, I would say that the Series S will probably have better performance simply because of its ridiculously more powerful CPU, which might honestly be in the neighborhood of a full order of magnitude better than the Xbox One X's. And since the One X is barely able to run at 30 FPS in most games at native 4K, I think it's a safe bet to say that the Series S with its more powerful CPU could obtain a stable 60 FPS at 1440p, and you know, as well as be rid of those awfully jarring FPS drops we get on the One X sometimes. And I don't believe that the Series S will ever be able to hit 1440p 120 FPS in any AAA games, despite the somewhat confusing advertising Microsoft has been putting out. And before you go crazy in the comments, Microsoft actually confirms this in this clip here.
As we said previously, we designed Xbox Series S to target 1440p at 60 frames per second with support for up to 120 frames per second.
So now, in one corner we have a console who can deliver a solid 1440p at 60 FPS, and in the other corner, a console which can do the same but at 4K. So the question then becomes, do you have a 4K display in your home? Or plan on getting one within the next couple of years? If yes, then it makes a ton of sense to pick up a PlayStation DE for the extra $100 if you have it. If not, then you'll be paying for horsepower that you potentially can't use, since both consoles will likely be able to do 1080p at 120 FPS. But a big thing to keep in mind is that even though you might not have a 4K display, those things are starting to get ridiculously cheap. I think there's this sort of stigma around 4K displays from when they first started to roll out en masse back in the mid-2000s. Because at the time, they were unaffordably expensive, even with the most mediocre of panels costing over $2,000. But now, in 2020, I think it's time we finally get rid of that stigma. 4K in your home is no longer unobtainable. I mean, just Googling 4K display right now will bring you to several monitors under $300 that have a 4K resolution, and doing the same for the term 4K TV will net you the same result. These things are dirt cheap. And don't get me wrong, they can get stupid expensive still if you want to trick it out with the latest bells and whistles, but the situation still begs the question, what are the odds that you don't upgrade to a 4K display over the next 7 years? These things will probably get even cheaper, and at that point, will your Series S start to hold the generation back? A topic for another video, but that's just some food for thought. But to continue, another thing to consider when looking at this comparison is how each device's hardware will be utilized. You know, I've made quite a few videos on the Xbox Velocity architecture and the PS5's SSD, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't personally more impressed with the hardware found within the PS5. Now that's not to say that the Series S won't have some great features going for it, like the pretty amazing quick resume feature, which allows you to shift through different games at the push of a button and play whichever while the others are suspended. Microsoft's Velocity architecture also takes advantage of features like sampler feedback streaming and mesh shaders, which totally give it a noticeable edge in fidelity and performance when compared to the last generation. But as I've said across multiple videos in the past, though these technologies and implementations by Microsoft are very impressive, there is almost always a PS5 equivalent that runs better on paper. And that's a pretty interesting point to bring up, because a lot of people 6 months ago would have told you that the PS5 has the faster SSD, but that the Series X is undoubtedly more powerful. And to their credit, they're 100% correct. But here we are in late 2020 comparing the PS5 to a machine that not only has a slower SSD, but also slower graphics performance too, so it's much harder to justify the existence of the Series S when you take that into consideration. But again, I don't want it to sound like I'm roasting the Series S, I'm not. Like I said, these consoles are for two different people, two completely different markets. So when you compare them, of course one is going to seem like the clear choice, with the only justification for the other being the fact that it's cheaper. Which also goes back to my earlier point that if Sony priced the digital edition any lesser, this video wouldn't even have to be made. The Series S might have literally been DOA. The Series S is targeting what I believe to be the ultimate casual gamer, the middle/high schooler, and people who genuinely might not be able to spare the extra funds for a higher end console. But if you're not in one of those three categories and just want to get the Series S to save a couple of bucks, it might not be in your best interest to do so. But getting back on track, let's see how these consoles will put their respective specs to use in exclusive games. And I'm going to keep this part as short as possible. Sony wins here, hands down, big surprise. Now, Microsoft seems to be making a bigger push this time around for more game studios to push out more games for Xbox to enjoy. But sadly, we haven't seen the fruits of that labor yet. Maybe we will in 2 to 3 years, but as of right now, Sony remains the console exclusive king. And with the new SSD speed poster child that is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart causing so much noise on the PlayStation side of things, it's really hard to imagine that the Xbox will have a game that demonstrates the capabilities of its hardware as well as that, because Halo Infinite certainly didn't do the job. Now, that's not to say that the Series S won't have anything going for it. Of course it will, especially if you saw Microsoft's exclusive game showcase. I'm personally most excited to play the Medium on my Series X. It looks like a pretty cool world slash story slash premise, like shifting between worlds. That's pretty dope. But exclusive games haven't been where Microsoft has shined, and it doesn't look like that's going to change, at least for the first couple of years of this generation. But where Microsoft does outshine Sony is in value, because Xbox Game Pass is a ridiculously good deal that you can get for as low as $9.99 a month and get access to over 100 games, even if those games are nowhere near the level of a Sony exclusive. But it's okay, because they don't have to be. They're 100 games. But with that being said, let's move on to the final comparison board. So on the left side we have the PS5 DE, and on the right side we have the Xbox Series S. So the PS5 is more powerful graphically speaking and will allow for 4K 60 FPS gaming. It also has a faster, fundamentally unique SSD, which should allow for some truly unique games like Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. It will also have a larger selection and higher quality list of exclusive games. The Series S, on the other hand, will attack you through an immense value proposition that you quite frankly can't find anywhere else on the planet, giving you 1440p gaming at 60 FPS, as well as offering the crazy deal that is Xbox Game Pass and other Xbox services, all while being $100 cheaper. So to finally answer the question as to whether or not you should get the Xbox Series S or PS5 Digital Edition, I think it genuinely comes down as to whether or not the $100 upgrade is worth these things right here. Do you have a 4K TV? Are you interested in new tech? And are you a fan of single player story driven games? If you answered no to all of those questions, then no, the PS5 DE probably isn't worth the $100 upgrade. And conversely speaking, do you not particularly care about value propositions, or want to play cinema level story driven games, or don't really enjoy compromise? Then the Xbox Series S might not be the console for you. At the end of the day, I think it all comes down to preference and your specific needs and wants, because as I've said countless times already, these two consoles have no business speed compared to one another either way, so you're either in one market or the other. It's up to you to figure out which one it is. For instance, for someone like me, a YouTuber who hates facing any sort of compromise for any reason, I would probably end up getting the PS5 DE if I had to choose, but if I weren't so spoiled and wanted to be as cost effective as possible, I could totally understand getting the Series S. What it offers for that price is pretty great, and honestly, for just a little more, you can get something even greater in the PS5 DE. But whatever, what do I know? I picked up the PS5 disc edition and pre-ordered the Xbox Series X, so it's obvious that I don't really believe in choosing a compromise. So now the question becomes, what do you believe in? And when you can finally answer that, that's when I think you'll find the console meant for you. But honestly, if you have the spare $100, you might as well go with the PS5, all jokes aside. But with that being said, ladies and gents, I think my time's up. What do you guys think about the question at hand? If someone was stuck between a Series S and a PS5 DE, what would you tell them? What advice would you give? I'm curious to know, so leave your comments down below. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you dislike the dislike, and be sure to subscribe to never miss a future upload on the channel. Oh, and hit that bell notification button if you're so inclined. Alright, I've been Innocence, you've been the audience, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.